I guess there's some good reasons why the Amazon has a bit more biodiversity than Baffin Island. So in Canada, they say that we're right at the edge of agriculture in the world, so cooling is a lot more serious than warming for us, that's for sure. Our next... sorry?
My land in Canada.
Yeah. The next speaker actually has a fair involvement with Canadian media and Canadian activities. And I'll just tell you a quick story about Pat Michaels before I give him his proper introduction. He took part in something called the Trial of Kyoto at the Canadian Museum of Civilization. This was set up by CBC Radio, and Pat was I think he was the expert witness for the people on the skeptic side, and Elizabeth May, who was the head of the Sierra Party, and now who is the only Green MP in Canada, was the head of the other side. And at one point during the question period, a lady from the audience said to Pat Michaels quite strictly, "And who are your funders?" And so Pat answered, and he explained that there was a very small percentage, I think it was 3% or something, that was from industry, and all the rest was from the taxpayers. So Pat explained how if he were biased on the side of his funders, then he would obviously be supporting the government's position. And the audience was actually quite satisfied with this, and the meeting went on, and more questions, and it was a very enjoyable evening. At the end of the evening, when they had to do their wrap-ups, their final sort of conclusions for the evening, Elizabeth May ended her speech. I don't know if she heard Pat's answer, but what she said is, you know, these oil-funded, fossil fuel deniers, that kind of a statement. Now, the audience, they knew in Pat's case that wasn't true. I mean, 98% or something of his funders was, in fact, coming from the federal government and other governments. And so the audience kind of like, oh, yeah, sure. Well, CBC Radio, who was covering this, when they broadcast the radio event the next day, they took out the question to Pat Michaels and his answer, but included Elizabeth May's conclusion. And so maybe Pat can tell us if it fits in somewhere. I know he complained to the ombudsman of CBC that wasn't quite fair, and it certainly showed me where CBC's bias lay, and it still lies that way, unfortunately. But maybe you can tell us, was there ever affirmative action on the part of the CBC? Did they apologize? Or no, they just edit out what you said that wasn't convenient. Anyway, I'll just give the proper introduction now. Pat Michaels is Senior Fellow in Environmental Studies at the Cato Institute and Senior Research Fellow for Policy and Economic Development at George Mason University. He is a past president of the American Association of State Climatologists and was a program chair for the Committee on Applied Climatology of the American Meteorological Society. Dr. Michaels was also a research professor of environmental sciences at the University of Virginia for 30 years, and when you came to Canada for that Trial of Kyoto, I think you were in that position. Michaels has been a contributing author and reviewer of the UN IPCC, so I guess he's one of the Nobel Prize sharers. His writing has been published in major scientific journals, and he is an author of the Climate Paper of the Year awarded by the Association of American Geographers in 2004. He's often on the media, and especially in Canada. He was on our panel as well during that press conference in 2002. He holds an A, B, and SM degrees in biological sciences and plant ecology from the University of Chicago. I wonder, did you meet David Suzuki when you were at the University of Chicago? He did his PhD there as well. Anyway, Pat got his PhD in ecological climatology from the University of Wisconsin at Madison in 1979. His most recent book is Climate Coup, Global Warming's Invasion of Our Government and Our Lives, published by Cato Books in 2011. So with that, I introduce Pat Michaels, a very influential figure in Canada as well.
Thank you much, Tom. You know, I have to get set up here, and I see we do escape. Hold on. Where am I? Okay, one of the things that, there we go. One of the things that's interesting is why is it always worse than we thought? Why is global warming always going to be worse than the previous research indicated? It really can't be that way in the real world. The real reason for that is because we have decided that science is a public good. It used to be that science was in fact funded largely by a very diverse community, but now it is not, and we pay the consequences for that. When public scientists have to summarize the science on climate change, as they do, to produce things like the endangerment finding for the Environmental Protection Agency, they're going to summarize from mainly one perspective, because to say it's not a problem is for them to cut off their own support. Simply the way it is. So I've been dealing with this problem after I got out of University of Virginia. It's not something you can study at a university, you know. Mr. Dean, I want to study bias in science. I think our scientists are biased. I don't think so. Instead, I've been concentrating on the process with the Environmental Protection Agency and the implications of public science. So the subtitle of this talk is How I Learned to Stop Complaining and Love the EPA. Now, I'm not the first person that's been concerned about the problem of politics getting into science and policy. This person here was the president of Columbia University, and then he had another job after that, for which he gave a farewell address in 1961. President Eisenhower said the free university is historically the fountainhead of free ideas and scientific discovery, but it has experienced a revolution in the conduct of research. A government contract has become a substitute for intellectual curiosity. You know, you all heard about the military-industrial complex. Well, these are the two paragraphs after that. Holding scientific research and discovery in respect as we should, we must be alert to the equal and opposite danger that public policy could itself become the captive of a scientific technological elite. The prospect of domination of the nation's scholars by federal employment, project allocations, and the power of money is ever present and is gravely to be regarded. This was extremely prescient. And when Eisenhower was saying that, Thomas Kuhn was publishing his book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, which was exactly complementary to the process of public choice control of science. The Structure of Scientific Revolutions say that scientists work in paradigms, and that it's very, very hard to buck the paradigms. It takes a long time to do so. The essence of Kuhn is, in science, novelty emerges only with difficulty, manifested by resistance against a background provided by expectation. Initially, only the anticipated and usual are experienced even under circumstances where the anomaly is later to be observed. Very prescient. You see, what he's saying here is that scientists are very reluctant to abandon their paradigm, and what public choice theory says is that money buys paradigms. So science becomes very, very sticky, and as a result, the scientific technological elite takes a very predictable path, including supporting things like Waxman-Markey. Now, what we're going to do in the rest of this talk is we're going to go from the failure of Waxman-Markey to the actual control of science via the control of policy via the EPA and its endangerment finding. Waxman-Markey was a cap-and-trade bill. People ask me to explain cap-and-trade all the time. It goes like this, okay? First you cap, all right? And then you trade your permits for carbon dioxide, okay? But you see, every year, more and more permits are denied, so that there's less and less to trade, so the result is not very pretty. Okay, now, the fact of the matter is that Waxman-Markey would have reduced our per capita emissions of carbon dioxide from 37 and a half years from now to what they were in 1867 after the Civil War. It's simply impossible. And the people recognize the absurdity of cap and trade. The cost estimates on cap and trade, remember that? You get that in your tax form every once in a while. Page intentionally left blank. Yes, indeed. Well, what the people saw, cap and trade passed on June 26, 2009. This is the Rasmussen Presidential Approval Index. It's strongly approve minus strongly disapprove. It's a 3-day running average. On June 29, 2009 was the first day that Rasmussen had cap and trade in all the polling that he did. Well, the day this line crossed and became negative was June 29, 2009, and it has never been positive for one day since. The week after this, the generic congressional ballot switched from Democrat to Republican and has only been Democrat for 1 week since. People read these numbers in Washington before they get up and pee in the morning, okay? It's the first thing that happens. It's very influential, and this is why cap and trade did not pass the Senate. So it moved to the Environmental Protection Agency. Mass v. EPA in 2007 stated that if the EPA found carbon dioxide to endanger human health and welfare, then it therefore must regulate it under the Clean Air Act. And they released an endangerment finding in December 7th of 2009, the first day of the infamous Copenhagen Conference that never accomplished a darn thing, thank God. The endangerment finding suffers from the influence of public choice, meaning the scientific experts who are on the gravy train are writing the foundation documents for the endangerment finding, and I discovered a way to fight that influence, and that's what I want to talk to you about for my remaining time. This is the document that serves as the basis for the endangerment finding more than any other. It is a document called Global Climate Change Impacts in the United States, and it's produced by something called the U.S. Global Change Research Program. Those are representatives from virtually every agency or entity that is gobbling up a lot of your tax money to tell that global warming is a serious problem that we have to do something about. None of them get any money if they were going to put proposals forth that said that this is an overblown issue. That's the essence, by the way, of public choice theory and how it affects science. So when I saw this document, I said, this is the worst. I reviewed it, and my review said, I've reviewed 20 or 30 of these climate compendia in my long career, and this is by far the worst that I have ever done, ever seen. Every paragraph can be contended. And then I decided to put my money where my mouth was. And I went to Ed Crane, the president of Cato, and I said, Ed, I think I can produce a document that looks just like this, has the same flow, the same subject matter, and take it on brick by brick, taking the whole community down. So he said, can you raise $300,000? I said, I don't know if I can. I got half of it, and I started off on the project, and we are going forward. So in October of this year, and by the way, before June 25th of this year, what you are about to see will be entered in the public record as part of the commentary on EPA's proposal to regulate coal-fired power plants. The cover of the document, this is the cover of the U.S. Global Change Research Program document. What is this line? Is this global climate change in the United States? That's what the title is. No, it's not. I think I'll show you that instead in my document. There it is. What are these data right here? That's U.S. temperature anomalies for the last 20 years. They haven't done a thing. The USGCRP document is exceedingly pretty. It's the one on the right. So is the Cato document, which is exceedingly pretty and looks just like theirs. Subject matter for subject matter. The USGCRP report, key message on global climate change, human activities have led to large increases in heat-trapping gases over the past century. Why don't you tell the rest of the story? Ours is human activities have resulted in the emissions of gases that warm the lower atmosphere, as well as particulates that counter the resultant warming. We have also changed the surface of the planet in complicated ways that have undetermined net effects on global climate. Then we have the chapter on national climate change. Again, you can see the format's exactly the same. In the U.S. Global Change Research Program, the U.S. average temperature has risen more than 2 degrees Fahrenheit over the past 50 years and is projected to rise more in the future. How much more depends on the amount of heat-trapping gases emitted globally, right, and how sensitive the climate is to those emissions. Message. Ours. Coterminous U.S. temperatures have risen less than the global surface average, which is not consistent with basic greenhouse warming theory. And there is no evidence for any significant change in droughts, frequency, and severity, and continuous U.S. precipitation has increased by 7%. We have a chapter on water. We both have chapters on water resources. Again, they look very similar. And I'm not going to go into too many details on this. I think you're getting the idea of the way that this was done. Energy supply and use, we even have the same pie charts on the first page, and they flow along in the same way. The U.S. Global Change Research Program says warming will be accompanied by decreases in demand for heating energy and cooling energy. The latter will result in significant increases in electricity use and higher demand. Electricity production is likely to be constrained by rising temperatures and limited water supplies in many regions. Excuse me. So here's what we have in our report. U.S. energy production and usage are affected not only by weather, but also by climate change. On the supply side, energy producers anticipate and minimize the impacts of severe weather events through best business practices and insurance policies. Shocking things that the USGCRP seems to simply ignore. Agriculture. My favorite chapter in this thing, I think you can guess that there was one of the people on this panel had something to do with the agriculture chapter. Hint, it's not me, it's this guy over here, and he did a great job. Many crops show positive responses to elevated carbon dioxide and low levels of warming, but higher levels of warming often negatively affect growth and yield. That's what our government scientists tell us. And here's reality. Elevated carbon dioxide increases the productivity and water use efficiency of nearly all plants, of course. This is the government again. Weeds, diseases, and insect pests. All the bad things get worse. They benefit from global warming. In fact, they've got a thing about weeds in this particular agriculture chapter. I just thought I'd like to show you one of the most famous images from, I think, the climate wars that will persist through the ages. This is the USGCRP's report on weeds. Okay, here's the weed growth in herbicide at 380 parts per million, and here it is at 680 parts per million. Now, ladies and gentlemen, do we grow weeds as a crop? No, we do not. So here comes, or do we grow weeds like we do commercial trees? No, we do not. So here, I believe, is the most famous picture that is going to come out of the, one of the most famous relics of the climate war. And he's a man who's not here, but he's father to Craig Idso, and he is really just a remarkable figure on this. Here's what happens when you put more CO2 in the air. Elderica pine, ambient concentration 150, 300, and 450 parts per million. Indeed, that's what happens. I want to close here to show you how bad the science is. Just one vignette of how bad the science is in the USGCRP report. In the end, it goes into regional reports, and the last region studied is Alaska. And at the end of the Alaska chapter is the following illustration. It is, the USGCRP report says, each bar represents a family of species. As air and water temperatures rise, marine species are moving northward, affecting fisheries, ecosystems, and coastal communities that depend on that food source. On the average, by 2006, the center of the range for this examined species moved 19 miles north from their 1982 locations. Note the reference is Meter and Litzau. So I decided to look up Meter and Litzau's paper, and I will close with my piece de resistance about how bad the USGCRP report is. Here's what Meter and Litzau actually said in their paper. A nonlinear accelerating time trend in northward displacement, unrelated to temperature or any other climate parameter we tested at any lag, suggests that mechanisms besides climate change must be contributing to distribution shifts in the Bering Sea. The failure of our exploratory attempts to explain variability among species underlines the difficulty of this research program. Now, one other final thing. The USGCRP report has 569 scientific citations. As we stand today, my counter document to the USGCRP report is sitting on scientific reference number 932. If you want to do it logically, yes, they left out more science than existed than I could put in my report. They did. Thank you very much.